Hello, my name is Paul Stookey, and my topic is the rising threat of cyberterrorism. If you go to slide 2, that's the table of the topics of discussion. The first one is cyberterrorism defined. So there's a lot of different, not a lot of, too different, but there are some different definitions out there. So I've used one that's pretty standard and well accepted. Then we'll talk about the details of the cyberterrorism threat. So this topic, in terms of a lot of debate or a lot of literature out there in terms of is cyberterrorism likely, and what is the capability of terrorists actually to conduct an attack on U.S. assets? I'm not going to enter that debate. It's been pretty well established. What I'm going to talk about is actually the likely targets and the form and manner that a cyber terrorist attack would take. So to that end, I'll actually cover a couple of case studies in terms of that involve cyberterrorism. And also, even though there's attacks have not been widespread in terms of cyber attacks, the use of the internet to support terrorist activities has been pretty well established. And then I'll get into some analysis of recommendations and a conclusion. Next slide, if you go to slide 3, what is cyberterrorism? This one I've kind of put on the slide and spelled it out for you, and I'll kind of read it here. It refers to unlawful attacks and threats of attacks against computers, networks, and information stored there within, done to intimidate or coerce government or its people in furtherance of a political or social objectives. That is key, is coercing or trying to intimidate officials to do what you want, to do your bidding. And further to qualify, though, as cyberterrorism, is that attacks should result in the violence against persons or property, or at least cause enough harm to generate fear. Terrorism is about causing fear. It's about getting people to be afraid of something because of an act that they've done. 9/11 was a prime example of that. Once the attacks on New York and D.C. happened, we had fear for 10 years afterwards in terms of at least that another attack would occur. There was a lot of money spent on the defense against terrorism. There still is a lot of money. So this would be a cyber one. First thing you're going to talk about is like critical infrastructure providers. So this, if you probably all recall, the Stuxnet malware that attacked the Iranian nuclear facility, what that did was effectively was able to shut down the systems there. There's a lot of details on that, and you can do reading, but what was interesting is that the malware was so effective in taking control. If somebody knows how to take control of such a system, a SCADA system, the system control and data acquisition, which are used to control these systems, these facilities, you could do a lot of damage. It was shown afterwards that they could have done enough damage to actually blow up the facility. Now, blowing up a nuclear facility in a community would actually cause a lot of fear, a lot of harm, which would actually effectively succeed in being a terrorist threat. Even groups like in 2002, U.S. Special Forces had acquired information like a backpack from Al-Qaeda members, and within that backpack, they did find information related to SCADA facilities in the United States, demonstrating that there was an interest, maybe not to conduct a cyber attack, but to conduct a normal kinetic attack against such facilities. So it was known and proven that terrorist organizations understand the efficacy and the effectiveness of attacking such a facility. And it's also like through the literature and you're reading on such facilities in the United States, there's not been a lot done to actually protect it physically, and there's a lot more physical protection than there is cybersecurity. So they are vulnerable, they are weak, and they're actually a primary target that if you took down an electricity provider, a nuclear facility, and you caused damage to that or blew it up, that would actually instill fear. However, right now it involves a lot of technical know-how. So for a terrorist organization to actually be able to take out a facility, right now using cyber would be very difficult. But a nation-sponsored terrorist group, maybe Iran supporting an organization, could make effectively, or Russia would be able to have that capability. Would they use it at this time to conduct a cyber attack against a facility? Maybe not. What I'm suggesting here is that it is possible. Go to the next slide, slide 5. Here, I'm talking about the actual group Anonymous, which you probably all heard of. If you can at this moment, just click on the link or copy and paste it. It's about a 2-minute video. That's a video from Anonymous, and it's directed towards the Ferguson Police Department. The Ferguson Police Department is in St. Louis, where you may or may not be aware that over the last week there's been a lot of riots happening in that area. So please click on the video now and then come back to the video presentation. So press pause, I guess. Okay, so you've probably actually seen the video now, and you can see that it was directed at the Ferguson Police Department and within the riots. And what they were doing in that video, what they had said directly and quite bluntly to the Ferguson Police Department and to the actual congressmen and legislatures in Missouri was that they wanted a new legislation passed that would actually limit or qualify what the police standards of misconduct must be. So, because there, obviously, the incident involved like the shooting of an unarmed 18-year-old black youth in Ferguson, and there was a lot of protest against it, saying that the police were actually overreacting. So now Anonymous wants this new law to be passed, and if they're saying if you don't pass it, or if you don't pass it, but if you stop the protesters from protesting, that they will actually go in and reveal all of your personal information. Now, what's happening in St. Louis right now is that there's a lot of tension between the police and the citizens of the area. So a lot of violence has been happening on both sides. So when you say you're going to give out personal information of a police department to the citizens there, it kind of infers that an act of violence or harm could happen as a result. Doing that is actually causing fear. Like, you are coercing them into actually getting a new policy or changing or developing a new legislation to what you want, the anonymous group wants, and if you don't abide by that, that they will actually do some kind of harm against you. So once this group, I think, was more hacktivist, is now maybe probably turning more terrorist. If you look at the definition that we discussed at the very beginning, I find this to be a very extremely interesting development in terms of what else, how far will they go to not maybe directly cause the violence, but they are encouraging or facilitating the violence. So they have no qualms about people getting violent in order for the anonymous group to get what they want. That's a very interesting development. I think it's a space to watch. If you go to slide 6, cyber supports terrorism. So for many years now, I mean, terrorists have actually been using the internet to support their activities. So mainly, there was incidences of cyber espionage, maybe not necessarily with terrorist groups, but the capability to go in and to actually, there's incidences of U.S. government facilities being hacked to find out about what their counterterrorism operations were like. So there is a lot of interest in terms of finding out what the capabilities are of the U.S. government to counter any kind of terrorism. So that information could either be directly taken by terrorists, or it can actually be sold to terrorists on the market, so they would understand their operations. The most, I guess, long-standing use of the internet has been to recruit new people into their organizations. There's a lot of, looking at this when I was researching it, there's a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of websites. There's websites now of ISIS that show and demonstrate all that they're doing in Iraq, the violence, the beheadings. I mean, it's inciting people to actually join these groups. They're quite graphic, quite horrifying, but they're very, very effective in actually getting new recruits, and they've been using that widely. And also in the information propagation, so the same, to get the message out in terms of what their cause is and who they're fighting for and what they're trying to get as a result. That's been very effective. There have been, I guess, even when Osama bin Laden put out his video, the U.S. government has tried to stop these sites or taking them down, but not very effectively. If you go into slide 7, some recommendations. This follows a strategy that was developed by the Department of Defense. So 1, establish a resilient defense posture, transform defense operations, enhance cyber situational awareness, assure survivability against highly sophisticated cyber attacks. We'll get a little bit more into